Shlomi is Bassa in historical Palestine. And it's where my grandfather used to live till 1948. My grandfather in 1948 left Bassa, was forced to leave Bassa with four of his children and come to Naqoura where his wife was from. And then Naqoura became our village because we took the Lebanese citizenship in 1955. And this became our village. One of the most ridiculous questions we've been hearing on Western televisions, we've been hearing in the streets of Western cities is, do you condemn the 7th of October? Well, do you condemn the 6th of October, the 5th of October, the 4th of October, the 3rd of October, the 2nd of October? Do you condemn 2022, 2021, till 1948 and 1947? This is the big question. Ask me, and I ask you. You can't just limit this whole history to one day.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rania Khalek, and this is Dispatches. Israel's aggression in Gaza is unprecedented in this century. But it isn't the only front in this war. There's also the Lebanon front, the Yemen front, the Iraq front, the Syria front. Together, they make up what's referred to as the resistance axis. What is the resistance axis? And why does it matter in Israel's genocide in Gaza? What's it like on the ground in Lebanon South, where Israel has bombed journalists, civilian cars, and homes? What are the red lines for Hezbollah and for Iran? Where do the Houthis fit in? How about the Hashd Shabi? Are they all coordinating or acting independently? And what would a regional war look like for the resistance axis and for the Americans and Israelis should it come to that? Joining me to break it all down is Al-Jazeera English correspondent and columnist Ali Hashem. But before we jump into it, this is just the first part of this episode. The full episode is available for Breakthrough News members only. You can become a member at patreon.com/breakthrough news. And as always, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell so you get a notification whenever we post new content. And if you appreciate this show, you can also donate below on YouTube. Ali, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Rania. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, it's such a pleasure to have you on. There's so much to talk about. You have been off and on reporting from the South and Lebanon. So you've been on the ground. You've also been reporting on the general situation around the region. So what I'd like to do is kind of go through the different fronts when it comes to this war. I do want to point out before we get started, though, to our audience that we are recording this near the end of the temporary ceasefire. So by the time this episode does go out, either the pause will have ended and the war will have restarted, or it will have been extended. So we'll have to wait and see what happens there. But I think a good place to start, Ali, would be Lebanon. You spent a significant amount of time over the last, month and a half in the south of Lebanon, very bravely, I would say, especially since the Israelis were deliberately targeting journalists on more than one occasion. So I'm glad that you made it out of there safely. But can you explain to our audience what's happening in the south of Lebanon? Where is it at now? Just kind of a quick overview of that particular front.
Well, Rania, let's begin with this. South Lebanon is more of a tactical front with some strategic objectives. What does that mean? Hezbollah isn't actually going all-out war with Israel directly on it, as just with the war in Gaza on raging. The issue is that Hezbollah knows very well that the war isn't going to stop the massacres that are being committed in Gaza. So what should be the next step for them? That's why they've been moving gradually towards engaging in this conflict. As Hassan Nasrallah said on several occasions, they are part of this war. But to what extent? This is the big question. And many people, especially those who support Hezbollah, were asking, so when is Hezbollah going to get involved on full scale in this war? Which I think is a bit early question, because as from the beginning, from the 9th of October, I arrived in Lebanon on the 9th of October, and I had a bit of conversations with people in the, let me say, the environment of Hezbollah and people who know well. So it was clear to them that this is going to be a long war, and it's not going to end in a month or even 2 months. At least this is what the thinking was just that early. So from the beginning, they knew that they're not going to exhaust themselves from the beginning. And they know very well the status, the strengths, and also the weaknesses of Al-Qassam brigades and the other resistance factions in Gaza. So, and they are on daily coordination, and they know all the details. So, getting into this war all out, getting into an all-out war wasn't something that they thought of from the beginning. Okay, yes, they think that this could happen maybe later on in this war, but not now. Now it's very early, and that's just the 9th of October. That was the beginning. So now, after around a month and a half, I think 50 days, 52
Something
days
like that.
since the
Yeah.
beginning of the war, after more than 15,000 announced victims. And of course, there are around 5,000 who are still on the rubble. There are tens of thousands of displaced people, even hundreds of thousands of displaced people. This picture today is emerging at the end as a different situation. Many people thought that Hamas has been crushed, and then we see the swap, the prisoner swap, Hamas handing the captives and then the Palestinians in jails. Many of those children, under 18 children, and I insist on children because we saw them on televisions. We saw them, even some of them didn't know what to say. 15, 16 years old, who do many people think that, and I'm kind of keen to stress this point. I was reading on Twitter and or X and saw this Bild headline trying to differentiate between the family values of Israel and the terrorist Palestinians or the Palestinian terrorists. The big question here, Rania, is who wants to end his life or her life by stabbing or killing or attacking or doing whatever to do, except if they were pushed to. There is a context for this whole thing, and we've been saying this. We've been saying this for the past, not 2 months, we've been saying this for the past, at least I'm 43 years old. For the past 43 years old, I know that there is a context. Imagine, Rania, I was covering this war from a village called Naqoura. Naqoura is the last village in Lebanon on the border. And I was witnessing from there the rockets being launched from South Lebanon, and some of them maybe hitting a village called Shlomi on the other side. Shlomi is Bassa in historical Palestine. And it's where my grandfather used to live till 1948. My grandfather in 1948 left Bassa, was forced to leave Bassa with four of his children and come to Naqoura, where his wife was from. And then Naqoura became our village because we took the Lebanese citizenship in 1955. So, and this became our village. But my grandfather lived all his life in Bassa, which is now Betset and Shlomi, two settlements, two adjacent settlements. So this is very deep in history. It didn't start on the 7th of October. And maybe one of the most ridiculous questions we've been hearing on Western televisions, we've been hearing in the streets of Western cities is, do you condemn the 7th of October? Well, do you condemn the 6th of October, the 5th of October, the 4th of October, the 3rd of October, the 2nd of October? Do you condemn 2022, 2021, till 1948 and 1947? This is the big question. Ask me, and I ask you. You can't just limit this whole history to one day. Yes, maybe that day was very, there was an attack and many people were killed, and all of us wouldn't want to see civilians being killed. So whatever happened on the 7th of October, the attack that happened on the 7th of October, was an accumulation of 75 years. Now, some people would really say this is not a reason to go and kill people, to go and kill children and women, or take them as hostages. But put this aside. But what about what was happening? Why should we take a moral position towards one day while leaving years and decades and even more than half a century, 75 years, without condemnation? This is what the world wants to see. This is the double standards.
No, you're absolutely right. I agree 100%. And I'm so happy that you brought up your background. I actually had no idea that you had a Palestinian grandfather. And I think it's important for people to recognize that when we talk about this, just shows that when we talk about the issue of Palestine, it's not just affecting historic Palestine, it affects all the surrounding countries. Because in all these places, whether it's Lebanon or Jordan or Syria, there are people who were pushed out who are now in those countries. And that's why there's all these different fronts in these different places. And moving back to the issue of the south of Lebanon, I'm curious if you can, since you did spend a lot of time in, I guess, what you called the environment of Hezbollah, what, as far as you understand, are Hezbollah's red lines? And have they changed at all, do you think, throughout the last 50 some odd days?
Well, I think it's been clear since Nasrallah's first speech, and also even before. The red line is crushing Hamas, is crushing the resistance in Gaza. And other than that, there is a kind of reasoning that Hezbollah is using. Now, some people might be convinced with, and some people might think that this is not Hezbollah that we know. This is not the resistance that we know. However, I'd like to give kind of a bit of explanation here. So to Hezbollah, the question is, if we are going to go all-out war, is this going to end the massacres in Gaza? No. If we are going to go all-out war, is this going to prevent Lebanon from being attacked and Israel committing massacres in Lebanon? No. Well, what's the other option? The other option is engaging in this battle gradually, and whenever the time comes, which is, I don't know and no one knows, and it might come and it might not come. And whenever the time comes, then get into this conflict in the right way. And we have to take into consideration also the legitimacy of this war for Lebanon. When Hezbollah started this engagement in the conflict on the 8th of October, Hezbollah started by hitting the Sheba farms. And we know that Lebanon regards Sheba farm as Lebanese territories. And it's disputed in the international law. And at the end, Hezbollah has their own pretexts to attack the Sheba farms. The second day, the Islamic Jihad are the ones who attacked Hera, which is a town close to Naqoura, towards the western sector. And then Israel retaliated by hitting Hezbollah positions on the border, killing, I think, 4 or 5 Hezbollah fighters. It's here when the Hezbollah's engagement went towards the blue line. But at the beginning, it started in Sheba farms. So right. The legitimacy of this war is an issue also, especially that we know, I mean, Lebanon is not a normal country.
And, to say the least. It's a nice way to put it.
Yeah. So it's a bankrupt country. People are bankrupt. Even those people who we were seeing leaving their houses, the South Lebanon, mainly the borderline, extends to 120 kilometers from Naqoura towards the Sheba farms. In this 120 kilometers, you have tens of thousands of people living. And by the way, it's not only Shia, which is the environment of Hezbollah. You have Christians, you have Sunnis, you have Druze, you have, all sects are there. So people leaving from there because of the Israeli bombardment and because of Hezbollah's engagement in this war would mean also a huge impact on the Lebanese society. It also will mean a huge weight on the government's back and burden. So here, who is going to cover the costs of these? I mean, these are details, but these details are important for whoever is covering the Lebanese situation, because you can't take into consideration the whole big picture without getting into details, because these are the details that are going to take us a step further to the war or take us a step back away from the war. So
Right.
those people are being taken to school. Some people that they already have their houses maybe away from the borderline, but someone should take care of them. Is the Lebanese government able to take care of them? This is a very big question. And
Yeah.
are people ready actually to be part of this whole war? Now, someone is going to say, and this is 100% right, when did Hezbollah ask anyone if they are going to engage in a war or not? In 2006, did they do this? Actually, not. But who says that Hezbollah of 2006 is the same Hezbollah of 2023? Hezbollah of 2023 is a completely different organization. If we are going to talk about their power, the number of fighters who are now part of this party, Hezbollah's involvement in the Lebanese system is different even. Hezbollah
Right.
of 2006 was starting to get involved in the Lebanese system. They didn't even have, at that time, they didn't even have, maybe it was the first time that they had two ministers in the Lebanese government. Now, they are more into the Lebanese system, more into the daily politics, and given all what's been happening over the past years, of course, Hezbollah's mindset is different today, and I
Absolutely.
think that's
Well,
sorry.
I
Go
wanted
ahead.
to no. I think you're absolutely right, and there is so it's actually a huge burden. There's so much to consider because going to war, obviously, we talk about Lebanon not being a normal country. It's bankrupt. It's also very polarized, and before Hezbollah even gets involved in a war, people are already criticizing. So you can imagine how they would just be blamed. I mean, there's the same people who will say, "Oh, Hezbollah is not doing enough," or the same people who will be very upset if Hezbollah gets more involved. So there's all of these things to consider, especially also Lebanon's capacity to deal with whatever happens if there is a war, whether it's displaced people, whether it's dealing with the fact that we already have no electricity here. What do you do when Israel starts bombing generators and power stations? All these sorts of things, the telecoms issue. But I do want to ask you something so I want to broaden this out to the broader resistance axis, and I want to go through some of the different fronts. But you said something in one of your columns over the last month that I thought was really interesting. And that's when we talk about this resistance axis, which here we're talking about Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, various factions of the Hashd-e-Shabi in Iraq, Syria in some capacity, and of course, Iran. You were talking about the military side of things and how it's not Iran really who's calling the shots in terms of military, it's more Nasrallah. So I'm curious if you could elaborate a bit on that, because I think that's an interesting new dynamic. Maybe it's like a post-Soleimani dynamic. I don't know, but you can tell me your thoughts. But what do you mean when you say Nasrallah is sort of the military leader of the resistance axis today?
Well, the fact is that if we go a bit behind, even if we go to the war in Syria, Nasrallah was engaged directly in this. Now, of course, who draws the whole framework is the leadership in Iran. I mean, Ayatollah Khamenei, who's the leader of this axis. But who is the field marshal? The field marshal is Nasrallah. He's the one who calls the shot. And probably this is one of the reasons the Iranians were achieving something in the region while others weren't able to achieve, because they were delegating to whoever is able to take the decisions. And for them, Nasrallah isn't just a proxy. He's not a proxy. Nasrallah is an organic extension of the Wilayat al-Faqih doctrine in Iran. He is part and parcel of this. So when people go to Iran and meet Iranian officials or people in the IRGC, I mean, or even people who are sympathetic with this path or this axis or this idea, they regard him very high. He's not a normal person here. He's above other ones. Even Qasim Soleimani had the picture of Nasrallah at his house. So we're not talking here about someone who, I mean, it's not about who orders. But Nasrallah to them is someone with a high value. They value his input. They value his point of view. They value his judgment on things. And since he's the man engaged here in the region, in the Middle East, in Syria, he is engaged. He's the one engaged with the Houthis in Yemen. He's the one on direct coordination with the Palestinians. And of course, we knew, and at least someone like me who has been covering Iraq for 4 years, I've been seeing this. Yeah, Nasrallah and whoever was representing him in Iraq, and it was Sheikh Mohammed Kawtharani for some time, were the ones who were on many occasions solving the problems in Iraq. So to the Iranians, it isn't something new. And here we have to differentiate, Rania, between the Iranian government and between the leadership, between the nizam, between the system, the establishment. This establishment sees itself as an establishment that extends towards the greater region, while the Iranian government is the one who is in charge of whatever is happening in Iran. So there is a difference here. It's not the same. So Nasrallah does not report to Ibrahim Raisi, and didn't report to Hassan Rouhani, and didn't report to Ahmadinejad. He always reports to Ali Khamenei, who is the leader. And this is, I mean, there is always this a dual path in Iranian politics, where we see the government on one side and we see the nizam or the establishment on the other side. And it's how things are being, let me say, managed over all these years, given the fact that while there is a doctrine, ideology ruling the establishment, the government is still ruled by the same mentality and the mindset of the bureaucracy that's been in Iran for the past hundreds of years. So it's an accumulation over here. It's different.
Yeah, and I just want to tell people who are watching, I mean, you've been based in Tehran before, you've reported extensively from there, so you know what you're talking about when you talk about this stuff. I want to kind of go through the different elements of what we call the resistance axis. So we've kind of talked a bit about Hezbollah, and obviously they're sort of at the pinnacle of it, militarily speaking at least. And then you have, I think, I want to move on to Yemen for a moment. I'm not sure, Ali, actually, if you've been in Yemen or reported in Yemen. No, Never. You haven't. You've not. Wow. Okay. Well, Yemen, I think, has really surprised a lot of us because obviously, since there's been the peace deal that's taken hold, you now have a more powerful Houthi movement that seems to care very much about Palestine and has not only been firing missiles at Israel, but also seized this Israeli ship. So I'm curious, can you talk about the significance of the Houthis of Yemen in this particular case? I think it's something that none of us expected to see this time around with this latest round of violence against Gaza.
Rania, going back to Abdul Malik al-Houthis speeches over the past years, he's always been mentioning the Palestinian cause and Palestine. And it seems there is the Houthis have been always trying to engage themselves in this cause in any way. Just watch and see, for example, during the wars on Gaza, Saif al-Quds 2021, and other wars, the number of people who used to go to the streets and demonstrate and rally for Palestine and for Gaza, and in solidarity with the Palestinians. So to the Yemenis in general, I don't want to limit this to the Houthis only. To the Yemenis, despite their differences, the Yemenis are too attached to the Palestinian cause, and this is not new. And I think whatever the Houthis have been doing over the past weeks, now of course this do not let me say equal or even comes close to whatever is happening in Gaza, to the war on Gaza. Neither Hezbollah's engagement nor the Houthis, the Iraqis, nothing really comes close to whatever is happening there, to the massacre that's happening there, to the war that's happening on Gaza. But at the end, these are signs of solidarity. Now, put solidarity aside. It's not only about solidarity. There is a picture, there is a bigger picture for the region. When we see this escalation happening gradually from Yemen, from Iraq, from Lebanon, and sometimes from Syria, because we saw a few rockets being launched from Syria. And Nasrallah mentioned the attack on Eilat, that Israel retaliated by hitting a formation linked to Hezbollah, the Imam Hussein formation in Syria, and who Israel is accused of launching the attack on Eilat. So we are seeing several fronts, and this is one of the Iranian axis of resistance attempts to show this geographical leverage. Over the past 45 years, this axis was in the process of being built. And Iran, of course, is leading this axis. So in this war, this is the first time that we started seeing the demonstration of this geographical leverage that the Iranians and the Axis has in the struggle. Now, is this meant just for solidarity? I can't see that only for solidarity. I see that as part also of the diplomatic attempts to end this war, to try to reach to a ceasefire by at least raising the stake and saying that this is going to be a regional war. Did they succeed in that? I don't think that they really succeeded till the moment, because the war on Gaza is still going on. Yeah, they weren't able to create this threat. Or maybe at the beginning, the Americans felt this threat. But my analysis is that the Israelis said they're not going to do anything. Just leave them. They're just going to launch some rockets and that's it. Till the moment, it's in this situation, whereas they did not succeed in their objective to stop the war. But would that mean a second phase, a second step, level 2? This is going to be the big question. Maybe after the war resumes, if there is no truce, and if the war ends, then maybe they would have succeeded.
Well, the next front I want to mention is the Iraq front. You've also reported extensively from Iraq, and you have these factions, particularly Hezbollah, the Iraqi Hezbollah group that's a part of the Hashd al-Shabi, that's been participating in the sense of at least, firing on American assets in Iraq. As a part of, you can call it solidarity, or, I think it's also meant to pressure the Americans to pressure the Israelis, right? I'm curious if you can talk a bit about that. How significant is that front? And why does it matter ultimately if it, does work in pressuring the Americans to, I don't know if we could say stop the Israelis, but to control the Israelis? I'm not even sure. But yeah, what's your take on the Iraq front?
Well, it matters when it comes to the Americans, of course. This should also be put into the right framework. It's harassment. It's not more than that for now. It's not really inflicting serious damage on the Americans, but it's meant to create pressure on the Americans in order to pressure the Israelis. Now, we are seeing the Americans attempting and trying on some occasions to pressure the Israelis. But we have to take into consideration also that this war for the Israelis is an existential war. It's not just the normal wars they wage. It's not about national security. It's about existential threat. That's why the Israelis also aren't going to take into consideration any attempts to change their mind, except if, at least from their own point of view, except if their objectives are met. But are they able to really meet their objectives? Are they able to achieve their objectives? Because the problem is that from the beginning, Netanyahu set a very high objective in annihilating Hamas. ending it. I mean, and that's not possible. We can see that clearly that his objective isn't realistic. And I think the Americans told him that, and many of his allies told him that. But the problem is that Netanyahu is also stuck between a rock and a hard place, because he's defending himself on one side, because he knows the next war is going to be on him when the war ends. It's going to be the internal or political war to annihilate him politically. And the other war is the war to him, the war of existence for Israel, because there is a very big issue, and that's the last thing I'm going to say, because I know I talk a lot, so I'm sorry.
No, but it's important, and this is what this show is meant for. It's long form, so please.
So the issue is that after the 7th of October, the main casualty of this attack was Israelis' trust in their state. Mm-hmm. And whenever this trust collapses, then the state is in danger. And that's why the Israelis been lifting and putting very high stakes, because they knew if they are not going to retaliate in what they regard as the appropriate way and end the threats, then this is going to be repeated once, twice, thrice. And if it's not going to be repeated from Gaza, it's going to be repeated from South Lebanon. Exactly. And this is going. And if Hamas got away with this, then others are going to be encouraged to do it. And that's why we see this war, this big war.
You know, it's also, when you think about what happens next, okay, let's say this war finally comes to an end. The North is Israel's bigger security threat at this point. Something like 80,000 Israelis have been evacuated from all the settlements in the North, from where your family comes from originally. And that's unprecedented. And they're saying repeatedly, they're not going to return until they feel safe. Well, how can they ever feel safe if Hezbollah exists? That's the whole thing now, right? Is that Hezbollah exists, it's strong. Israel, I guess I would say not Israel necessarily, but the Zionist project is definitely facing an existential crisis right now, because both in the south around Gaza and in the north, people have left and they don't want to go back because they don't feel safe because of these resistance movements that exist. So I don't know what that means for the day after, if there's a day after, anytime soon. I'm not sure if you want to add something on that before we move on to the next.
Well, there will always be a day after. So whatever is going to happen, there's going to be a day after. But of course, there is a very big threat, and to the Israelis, especially in the north, because the north, the narrative about the north has been evolving in Israel over the past years. Look at Hezbollah. Hezbollah is piling rockets. Hezbollah is bringing the precision missiles. Hezbollah's fighters, the Ridwan forces, So they've been waging on themselves, the Israelis, a psychological war. And that's why right now they have to deal with it in any way.
Ali, let me ask you about Iran. You talked a bit about Iran. And how, these aren't necessarily, especially with Hezbollah, it's not a proxy force the way they see it. I'm curious, though, obviously Iran isn't directly involved in the sense of like militarily being involved. However, what Iran says matters, what Iran does matter. And I'm just curious, what are Iran's red lines when it comes to this? And I guess it's a broader question about what is the resistance axis red lines? Like you talked about Hamas being crushed. That's a red line for Hezbollah. Would that extend to being a red line for Iran? Obviously Hamas is a very important partner in this axis.
Well, I think the red line for Iran is Iran being hit, not other than that.
Okay.
Other than that, Iran is not going to engage in any war. And that's why Iran's been building over the past 4 decades layers and layers around Israel. Mm-hmm. These layers, this is a huge war, a big war. It's a long-lasting war. That's already started in the day the Shah was toppled in Iran in 1979 and continued till this moment. So at least I don't see the Iranians engaging directly in such a war. The issue is that now the main request, or let me say demand, is hitting the head of the dragon. This is what's being said in Israel now. So go hit the head of the dragon, hit Iran directly, rather than dealing with allies here and proxies there and whoever is here. I think this is going to be the only situation when we see the Iranians engaging directly. But till then, it's going to be a layer after layer. So I don't see them.
Then the next thing I'd want to ask you is, okay, so that's Iran's red line. But when we talk about the resistance axis more broadly, what would it look like for the resistance axis if Hamas loses? And obviously that's a huge if. Hamas is not losing. At least it doesn't look like they're losing. They're fighting back still. Militarily, they still exist, and they're still quite strong. But obviously it's not, nothing's a guarantee. So let's say Hamas is actually crushed. Let's say it reaches that point. What would it look like for the resistance axis? Do you think they'll throw, aside from Iran, would they throw all of their military might at this? Or would they try and negotiate? What does that, I guess, quote unquote, regional war, if it escalates to that, if that red line about Hamas is hit, what does that look like?
Well, Rania, the moment that Israel will be winning this war with Hamas, they will build on this momentum, and they will not actually give the chance to resistance axis or the Iran axis or whoever is fighting under this axis to initiate. Israel will continue its war. It will take its war from Gaza to Lebanon. It will take its war from Gaza to Lebanon to Yemen to Iraq, everywhere. Anywhere it sees a threat, it's going to deal with it. And that's why, till the moment, they're not dealing with it, because they're not winning. And if they were winning...
No, continue, please.
Whoever is winning a war would have at least a picture of victory. Till the moment, Israel did not present to the world a picture of victory. This is very important. This is one. While Hamas was able to present a picture, at least of resilience, when they were able to get their captives handed to the ICRC, to the International Commission of Red Cross, in the middle of Gaza City, where Israel was pounding and hitting and doing its ground operation. So after 50 days of war, Hamas was able to get their own victory image, or the image of resilience, from the city center of Gaza, while Israel, till the moment, isn't able to do that. Sinwar is still able to negotiate. He is negotiating directly. He is giving the Hamas leaders outside Gaza the red lines and the framework for any kind of negotiation, any kind of deal, any kind of swap. He's the guy calling the shots, while he is somewhere under maybe 10 stories, I don't know where, in Gaza. So this is how things are for now. To Israel, the day Israel is going to win or to start winning, and let me tell you one thing. I've been watching the Lebanese front, of course, for the past month and a half. I've been there for a month since the beginning of the war. The Americans were always saying, we are dealing with the Israelis. We'll make sure that this is what they were been telling the Lebanese government. We'll make sure that the Israelis are not going to concentrate on the Lebanese front and will just leave the Lebanese front. Actually, I think the Israelis didn't have the power, didn't have the ability, didn't have the might and the focus to be able to deal with two fronts. This is a very big lie. Israel can't deal with two fronts, because if you are going to deal with the Gaza front and the Lebanon front, it's going to be something different. And we are saying they are in Gaza right now with tens of thousands of soldiers, with all their might, the military might, the air force, and the intelligence from everywhere. They're receiving intelligence from everywhere, from Arabs, from Americans, and they have their own sources. Until the moment, they're not able really to crush Hamas. Yes, they crushed people. They killed Reem, the soul of the soul. They killed the children. This is what they're doing. They're killing the children. They're not achieving anything. We didn't even see a picture showing, for example, 10 of Hamas fighters surrendering to the Israeli forces. If you don't have this picture, what do you have?
If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear the rest, you can access it by becoming a Breakthrough News member at patreon.com/breakthrough news.